I'm Kelly McCullen with the North Carolina Channel. For the next half hour, we will discuss the ConnectNC bond, the pros and the cons from the frontier at the Research Triangle Foundation. Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen with the North Carolina Channel. We are here at the frontier at the Research Triangle Foundation, a high-tech makerspace, and we're discussing a very important issue with two very influential people in this debate. Former Judge Bob Orr and Nicole Revels. They're here to discuss the pros and the cons with the ConnectNC bond, a $2 billion proposal that North Carolina voters will decide the fate of on March 15th. We literally tossed a coin, to be fair to both of you. And Judge Orr, you're first. Tell me about this bond, because it seems people are just now cluing in on what it means, more so than the $2 billion, which has been out there a while.
Well, this is an enormous investment in the future of North Carolina. Approximately half of the funding would go towards capital projects at the university campuses across the state. Then there's approximately $335 million that would be spent primarily on repairs and renovations for the community college system. And the focus educationally is on the science, technology, engineering, and math, the STEM programs, with the idea being that the future of North Carolina is inextricably tied to the sciences and technology when it comes to jobs, when it comes to the kind of things that North Carolina will need to do. And one of the numbers, the focus obviously is on the amount of the bond, but since 2000, North Carolina's population has grown by 2 million people. And as a result, there's all sorts of needs within the system, both educational and our state parks, our National Guard, water and sewer, all of which are part of the bond. So if we're going to meet the demands of a growing population, if we're going to be competitive both in the United States and internationally, then this bond is the kind of investment that voters need to say yes to.
Nicole, I don't meet too many people out there in public discourse who are against education, against infrastructure investments, and I've read your work, including an op-ed just from the recent days ago. Is this about the principle, your opposition to the debate, or to the bond, or is it about the money, or is it both?
A little bit of both. There are many reasons that I'm opposing this bond. In principle, I think that our state should think twice about acquiring a $2 billion debt and leaving those debt payments plus millions of dollars in interest to future generations to have to pay. But I also think that when you look at the specifics of this bond, that there's a better way to go. Many of the items within the bond are not allocated to any specific project, and so that leaves a lot of question about what voters are actually voting to approve. I think that if items are truly important for our state, then they need to be prioritized by legislators during the budget adoption process. This is also an omnibus spending bill for items that I think should be considered individually and prioritized based on each item's own merits rather than lumped together with many items that several legislators have called pork barrel spending and Christmas tree handouts in order to get this bond passed. We need greater accountability and greater scrutiny over the spending of North Carolina tax dollars.
Just to her point, what's wrong with pay-as-you-go? State's running a healthy surplus for now. This is some debt you're going to pay on. We're going to pay on if we pass it for over 20 years.
Well, about 20 years for the bonds. We're at historically low interest rates. North Carolina has a AAA bond rating, so we can get the most favorable terms. And we have to go back and look at the fact that during the recession, beginning in 2007, a lot of important capital and renovation needs on our campuses, our investments in other parts of government had to be deferred. And we now have, as you indicated, we're on a sound financial basis. The future is positive. And so this is an opportunity to invest in a wide range of projects, many of which ideally would have been funded some years back. But now's the opportunity. Now, Nicole talks about a lack of accountability, but all of the university projects, the major ones, the $85 million for the North Carolina State Plant Science Initiative, and the $94 million for the laboratory facility for the Department of Agriculture, all of the university projects have been vetted and considered by the Board of Governors, prioritized, studied by the legislature. Republicans, Democrats, liberals, conservatives have all evaluated these. The community colleges, each campus has indicated where they need repairs and renovations and where the money would be spent. Each state park, and we're in our 100th anniversary year of our state park system, each of those projects is specifically identified as to each park and what it would be used for. So we think the accountability is excellent. This was a project that received a lot of scrutiny in the legislature, not something that was done behind closed doors, and a lot of public input from university leaders, from business leaders, from agricultural leaders around the state, all advocating for it. And while I appreciate Nicole's advocacy against it, I think when you look at the aggregate support that the bond has across the board, bipartisan support, it would seem to me that some of the concerns that Nicole has have been answered to everybody else's satisfaction.
To the transparency issue, Ms. Revels, which parts of this bond bother you the most? He listed different buildings that to be built. I've noticed that you have mentioned the community colleges, saying just call it repairs, renovations, and new construction or something like that. Where is the gap for you in the transparency, which is really a trust issue when you look at trusting legislators to craft a bond package that doesn't have all the details?
Well, first of all, there's the marketing of this bond. Initially, Governor McCrory went on a campaign tour and touted this as a transportation funding mechanism. Of course, all of the transportation funding was pulled from the bond before its final adoption by the legislature. However, there was no counter campaign from him after that was done, and so a lot of voters have been under the impression that infrastructure in relation to this bond amounts to transportation funding, and that is shown in the polling that has been done. The Civitas conducted a poll about this bond, and it demonstrated that the majority of voters polled, Democrats and Republicans, thought that the infrastructure was transportation funding. Now, the other area, well, there are several areas of this that I would question. You look at the water and sewer line item. Now, we are told that there are some areas, which is normally a municipal function, but that there are some areas of our state that are operating on antiquated water systems, and they need some help from the state in order to update their systems. However, here's the legislation for the bond. There is not one single water and sewer project listed within this bond. They want us to approve a $309 million pot of money to allocate the funds later. And you're going to be paying millions in interest in the meantime. That is money that is just thrown away on the backs of future taxpayers. And there's a provision within this bond for reallocation that determines that legislators can reallocate the funds to items other than what is listed within the bond. So we don't have a real guarantee that the items we think we're voting to fund are what will actually be funded with all of this debt. So, if you look at North Carolina's history of things like the gas tax and the education lottery, areas where there was leeway for that funding to be reallocated, and look what has happened there. I think we need greater scrutiny specifically outlined within the legislation before we adopt this.
Mr. Orr, that brings up a great point. I think about this as part of my legislative coverage. Republicans for years ran in the minority position in North Carolina, and you don't trust the man. Don't trust him. We need to be there for accountability. Now it seems some conservatives are going after Republicans on that very same point, that we don't have every single detail, and every single detail is not promised. What is reasonable when you vote for a bond? how much flexibility should the voter give, if any, when they're looking at $2 billion on the plate?
Well, first of all, I think we have to understand that there was extensive vetting of all of these various proposals during the course of the legislation. And, you know, the press is covering it. They're reporting on it to the public. As for the transportation component, yes, originally there was a transportation portion proposed, but due to a reallocation of highway trust funds by the General Assembly, it was considered unnecessary to include the transportation part in this bond package. The important thing is it was passed late in the session, you know, so we didn't really see a final determination until pretty late, and literally within weeks of it being passed, our 501c3 nonprofit referendum committee was formed. We began raising money so that we could educate the public. I mean, we would love for the public to know everything and anything out there about all of these projects and all of the many wonderful things that will be done for North Carolina across the board. The water and sewer, it's interesting. I mean, that in the context of, we see what happened in Flint, Michigan. Clean water and adequate sewer facilities are critically important for the welfare of our citizens. They're important to attract businesses. And this particular package is run essentially like the Clean Water Trust Fund. Local governments have to put together their package, demonstrate their needs, and then there's a review process. And it was clearly impractical for the General Assembly to try and do that, considering how many small towns and communities we have around the state. So the $309 million water and sewer package, I think is critically important for small towns, small communities that struggle to have the tax base to upgrade and modernize their system.
How is it going to work when to the point, if you borrow the money but you don't have it allocated, there will be an application process? How long before we sell the bond, begin paying the interest, and then we start seeing in these small towns or big towns infrastructure and water and sewer?
Well, I wish I was a bond lawyer in the sense of understanding the nuances. But it isn't like if the bonds are approved or when they're approved on March 15th that all of a sudden somebody delivers a $2 billion check and interest starts running. There is a process across the board where the state has to put together the specific bond proposals, go into the bond marketplace, and have the bonds issued. So
it's slow.
Yeah, it is slow. And of course, when you're talking about major facility constructions on our university campuses, from Western Carolina to UNC Wilmington, and in the community colleges, there obviously has to be a bidding process, you know, design plans and the like. So it will take time, but we're not going to be paying interest on bonds until they are actually issued, and that's a process that you know government is used to doing, but it takes time.
Nicole, how does it work from the grassroots level? Because I've been to the ConnectNC bond site. To their credit, they don't talk about roads. However, the branding up front set the tone. I can understand why you would say that. Where does the responsibility lie with voters and with North Carolinians to understand what they're voting for, as opposed to people who are proposing it having to go back and equally provide a counterweight to what they initially thought they were promoting, but the legislation changed? Convoluted question, but how do you get voters involved? How do you get them educated in time to make that, you know, so that they know there's no road there?
Well, it is certainly difficult since ConnectNC has raised millions of dollars for their marketing. They're calling this an education and infrastructure bond. And so a lot of people equate that to K-12 education and roads. That I'm not saying that they are being deceptive in their information that they're putting out, but the average person hearing those terms associates those things. There is no K-12 education in this bond. There are no roads within this bond. It's the majority, largest portion of it is going to infrastructure at the university system. I think that those items should be considered by our legislators in great detail and prioritized based on their importance during the budget adoption process. The National Guard funding, that's the smallest portion of the entire bond, less than 4%, and it's not going to materials or equipment. It's for 3 regional buildings is my understanding. Yet the mailers that I've received from ConnectNC tout that National Guard funding as though it's a huge portion of this bond, even if they're not specifically saying that. They're saying support the National Guard, support North Carolina's safety. If that is a matter of public safety, that item should be considered individually and funded by legislators. We have the money right now to give the National Guard the funding within this bond, and so that should be looked at individually. I think that the bond should have been renamed, but you talk about the press reporting on the projects of this bond. And, you know, I've seen in my local paper even plans for the community college in my area and what they intend to do with that funding. The problem is none of that is within the legislation, none of it. All these plans are subject still to approval, and we do not know. All that it says, like you mentioned, is the community colleges and how much money that they're going to receive from this bond, however many millions. And that was allocated by the state using a formula in order to determine how much each community college would receive. And that formula included things like their enrollment numbers. It was not allocated based on individual necessity of projects. So these plans that you see in the press about this community college is going to remodel their auditorium, none of that is solidified within this bond legislation. And in fact, I'll give you a specific example. Caldwell Community College, that's the county that I live in, and they are slated to receive over $5 million from this bond. However, in ConnectNC's materials, when you go by listed by county, it shows Watauga County campus, their secondary campus, as being where the bond money is going. So I would infer from that that they have projects on the Watauga campus that they're planning for that funding. However, in my county, Caldwell County, they are publicizing their plans for that money. In Watauga County, in their papers, they are publicizing their plans for that money. So it's very up in the air about where this funding is actually going, what the projects are. The voting public does not have enough information, and they cannot have enough information because it doesn't exist.
The polling suggests this bond will pass, Mr. Orr. The point that Ms. Revels is bringing up is, okay, you pass it, we can't tell what the local folks want to do with that money once they get it. How do local voters hold their local community colleges accountable, or what's the best possible strategy for making sure that promises are kept?
Well, in regard to the community colleges, we have to remember that the bulk of the funding for community colleges is provided by the counties, and we do have some multi-county sites, but you have a board of trustees for each community college. You have a statewide community college board. All of these allocations have been reviewed by the community college board, by the legislature in putting it in here. Now, as to whether Caldwell Community College is going to use its money for a science building or for renovation of an auditorium, that's information that the local community colleges would certainly answer, as they have for Nicole or any other concerned citizen. But you have to look at legislation. You've obviously covered the legislature. You can only micromanage the budget process up to a point. And so what they have tried to do in this this budget package is to do what folks have said for years and years and years. The local people have that final input and say on it through their local community college. But again, that's only a part of it. And I have to address the ConnectNC. In trying to educate and market the bonds to the public so they understand it. I mean, clearly, agriculture, education, our parks, National Guard, all of the component aspects of this bond package pull North Carolina together. And again, it goes back. You know, if Nicole doesn't want to invest money down the road, you know, I understand that. But there has been an aggregation of business and education leaders, National Guard leaders, conservationists, Democrats, Republicans, you know, all have come together to say it's a good time. These are excellent projects. They're important to the long-term growth and welfare of our state to meet future needs and to address the influx in population. And I have to, since Nicole's talked about specifics, you know, Western Carolina University up in Colway has a science facility built in the 1970s. And the chancellor has said when that was built, there were like 12 nursing students, no engineering programs. They now have, I think, over 5,000 students who are enrolled in some type of nursing and science and health-related engineering careers. And part of their responsibility is to help the broader community, to put nurses out there in rural areas or smaller communities like Caldwell County, where Nicole's from, or eastern North Carolina. And you know, the chancellor has said if we don't have the funding for this new science building, a state-of-the-art facility that will serve our student population, our community, it devastates our ability to provide the kind of quality education needed by not just by the students, but by the broader community.
It's one thing to debate the merits of borrowing. That's a philosophical debate. What about the tax play? They say no new taxes and no new tax increases. Nicole, do you believe them when they assert that, or is this a wait-and-see skepticism for folks who may oppose the bond?
I do not believe that claim. I think that North Carolina's history demonstrates otherwise, and I have cited research papers on my website and social media pages to demonstrate that the same promises were made for the 2000 bond, that there would not require a tax increase in order to pay it off, and yet there was a series of tax increases. The legislators of today, you remember probably how much back and forth there was, even over just last year's budget, within our current legislature. They have trouble agreeing right now. They have no way to guarantee what is going to be done by future sets of legislators when this debt comes due. You're talking about $100 million a year in principal alone, plus millions of interest. So there's no way to guarantee that there won't be a tax increase. There very likely will be a tax increase. However, even if there's not a tax increase, if we have $100 million a year to put toward paying off debt service, then we should free up that money and put it towards prioritizing important projects. And you know, even if there's not a tax increase, you're talking about taking that money away from future priorities. I think we need to do better than leaving debt to future generations. And I also want to bring up the aspect about the transportation funding within this bill, because that was something that sold a lot of people, especially, you know, the governor met with commissions and had them adopt resolutions thinking that that was going to fund transportation items. There are a lot of people that were sold on this bond because of the transportation funding aspect. And it was said that that has been cleared up now because they're going to stop funneling money from the gas tax to other items aside from roads. However, the North Carolina Department of Transportation doesn't say that that's fixed their funding needs. And I have an article right here that's is titled, "The Governor Calls for More Bonds at Economic Forum," in which it is inferred that, or it's actually stated that the governor hinted that he was going to push for another bond for transportation if this bond passes, and that would be a signal for him. So I think we need a real discussion about the merits of funding state priorities with debt. We have the money, we could prioritize projects and pay as we go.
That's the first time you've heard that one.
Well,
pay as you go.
If you take the model that Nicole would propose, that we either pay for it now out of the existing budget. If you do that, it's about 10% of the $22 billion budget that the state has. You would either have to raise taxes, which I assume Nicole is against, or you're going to have to find $2 billion in services, teacher salaries, the K-12 education system that was referenced. So the let's pay now concept is either going to seriously gut existing programs or result in taxes, which is why the legislature, which is a fiscally conservative legislature, said that we're going to propose this bond. It's a long-term, low-interest debt. There is a specified line item amount in the state budget that pays down debt, and the current legislature has actually accelerated that. So we've seen that going down. As you indicated earlier, Kelly, the state's in good fiscal shape right now, and if you're going to invest, I mean, it's like it doesn't make any difference whether you're a homeowner or you're a citizen considering buying a home as an investment, or a business person, a young startup business, as we see back here at the Frontier, or you know, a larger business. You have to make serious business decisions to invest and grow your business, or to buy a home instead of just paying rent. And you know, the leadership of the state has carefully crunched the numbers. They've looked at the long-term projection and have asserted that there is no need to raise taxes to fund this bond, that we have the capacity to do it within our current budget.
And we've got about 30 seconds left. I'll give you the last word. He says it's time to invest using bonds. Okay, well, you talk about this in comparison to a home loan. I do not think that this compares to a home loan because, as you stated, it's less than 10% of our state's operating budget. If your home in its entirety costs less than 10% of your household expense budget, you could pay for it without a mortgage. And further, you don't adopt a line of credit for your home and leave the payments to your kids to pay for. There you heard both sides, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Kelly McCullen here at the Research Triangle Foundation's Frontier Water discussion on ConnectNC. Folks, Google ConnectNC, learn about this bond, and cast your ballot on March 15th. See you soon. North Carolina Channel is made possible by the financial contributions of viewers like you who support the UNC TV network.